Hey there, it's Mark. You might be wondering what this channel is about, so basically this is it. I'm going to teach you my favorite programming language. That language is called Elixir. It's productive, scalable, and fault tolerant. And you might be wondering what I mean by fault tolerant. That's because fault tolerance is not something we talk about too much in programming languages. Elixir is based on the Erlang virtual machine, or it runs on the Erlang virtual machine, and it has access to Erlang functions and libraries and so forth. And Erlang was basically built to be fault tolerant. It was made for the telecom industry. So unlike a web page where a bit of downtime, like 1% downtime, isn't that bad. Obviously, you don't want it, but it's, if I can't check Twitter for half an hour or something, it's not the end of the world. Whereas if I pick up my phone and there's no dial tone, that's kind of a big problem. And people literally could die if that happens because people can't get through to 911 and so forth. So the thing that Erlang excels at is dealing with many concurrent processes, like concurrent phone calls or chats or things like that. And if some part of the system crashes, it's supervised by other parts of the system that will restart it. And it can have fairly complex orchestration patterns. And it's actually the kind of thing that is difficult to do with most programming languages and most virtual machines. So they would dish it off to the system level and have a whole bunch of Docker containers orchestrated by something like Kubernetes. With Elixir, with Erlang, it's just kind of built in with OTP. All right, so here is a subjective chart, but based on some objective facts that I've put together, comparing different programming languages. The high level is something like Java or Golang is amazing if you are a huge company like Google and you have many developers who need to work together, and you have many users, and you really care about optimizing server costs. And at the other extreme would be something like Rails, or I didn't put it here, but say Python and Django would be fairly similar to Rails. That case, you've got something that's not so great in terms of server performance, and debugging can be more difficult. There are more places where so-called magic can happen because of the dynamism of the language, and it can be a little harder to work together with large teams unless they're all very disciplined, which to be fair, many are. On the other hand, if you have a small team, it's extremely fast to get things built. Even solo developers can build fully functional software as a service products with Rails. With Java or Golang, it's a lot more boilerplate and it's a lot more difficult. Even using a framework that basically copies Rails or was highly inspired by Rails, like say Play, or I believe the Golang one is called Martini, and then their lower level one is called Gin. Even using something like Play or Gin, you're not gonna have the same level of productivity as you would with Rails, at least not in the early days. Maybe later on, then you'll get some advantages from having static types or something like that. But at least for the past decade or so, Rails has been the median stack for the really successful breakout startup. And this would include not only old companies like Twitter, but even more recent ones like Stripe or Teespring or Coinbase, Indiegogo. There are a lot of very successful companies that have built on Rails. Then there are some other languages which are kind of in the middle, and that's where I would put PHP and Node. One big difference between the two is PHP really doesn't have a good asynchronous story. It just starts up the whole server every single time a request comes in, whereas Node is asynchronous and excels at things like chat. A lot of times, actually at companies where I've worked in the past, we've either replaced all of or replaced part of Rails or Django systems with Node because we wanted to have chat. and we didn't want to have to use an external service like, say, Fay or Redis. Now, Node is actually where my own history starts as far as being a professional developer. I worked for several years with Backbone.js, Node.js, or React and Node, and I've worked with CoffeeScript and TypeScript, so I'm more familiar with the JavaScript world, and everything is doable. It works fine, but to be honest, there are definitely a lot of pains. It's still not a great language. Even with more recent changes to the language, they're not really eliminating a lot of the bad parts. They're just adding more and more and more things onto it. And I truly pity any new developer who has to learn JavaScript now, although you kind of all have to if you're working on the web. So such is life. Anyway, after I'd worked with Node for a few years, I just finally put aside a whole week and really messed around with Rails. I was in Thailand, and I went through the Rails tutorial just on my own, and then built a few simple Rails apps, and I realized I was actually more productive in terms of getting MVPs built with Rails than I ever had been with Node, which was kind of crazy because I had I don't know. I had dabbled with Ruby a fair bit here and there over the years, but I'd never used it professionally. Oh, that's not true. I had used Ruby professionally just for scripting and small things, though. And I had a ton of experience with Node, on the other hand, but it was still faster for me to get things done with Rails. And that's partially because of a unified community, partially because of the really opinionated convention over configuration nature of the framework. And I wasn't having to pick and choose libraries at every single level. And debugging and testing were also both a bit easier as well. So I was really pretty stoked. I thought it was great until I made an app that needed to be a bit more performant and deal with more evented things. And then I was basically right back to considering building out part of it in Node, or maybe migrating the whole thing to Node. And at that time, I started looking around and really seeing what the other options were. PHP is, it's got a Rails-ish framework. Laravel, actually, it's got a few, like Cake PHP, several were, but Laravel in particular has a really great community and a lot of momentum. And I looked at it, and it's a bit more performance, kind of middle of the road at everything. But I really wanted a high performance setup because I wanted to offer something to people for free and just support it through ads or affiliate deals. And that's really hard to do if you don't have the right kind of setup. And I specifically wanted chat. I wanted video chat in it. So I started looking at Java or Golang, and I actually very nearly decided to go with Scala and the Play framework, which is highly performant. And actually Scala's actor model has a lot of things that are similar to how Erlang and Elixir OTP work. But then I discovered Elixir, and I was pretty amazed at how well it does across the board. It's just about as fast to build something as a solo or a small team with Elixir as it is with Rails. Obviously, it hasn't been around for a decade, doesn't have all the libraries Rails has, but it's growing quickly, and just in terms of what you need to build yourself, those parts you can do about as quickly in either language. And it doesn't sacrifice any performance to do that. In fact, not only is it more performant than Rails, but it's also more performant than Node or PHP, or even something like Golang with a similar level of abstraction library. Like say you use Martini, which is their Rails clone. Elixir performs at like 5 times as fast in some benchmarks I've seen, or 4 times as fast, and it's actually even a little bit faster than just using Gin, which is more like, say, Rack, or maybe like Sinatra would be in Rails. And getting incredible performance with something that's fast to build in, I was blown away just from that immediately. And then I discovered that debugging is also fairly easy with Elixir. it's hard to say if it's quite as easy as it would be with Java. I've never seen like a giant team of Elixir programmers since it's a new language. However, I will say the fact that it's immutable and functional makes it a lot easier. Just by its design, it's pretty straightforward to test things, and you don't need to make nearly so many mocks as you would in some other languages. And there's also functional pattern matching on the function heads, well, or in case statements, or in many places. So you can, for example, say if you're making a Twitter clone, you can make a function where the second argument has to be a tweet struct. And if it's not a tweet, it doesn't match that function. So you're really getting about 90% of the benefits of static typing right there. You can enforce what your functions take and what they do with it. And due to its protocols, which Erlang does not have, that was an addition from Elixir, it's possible to have the same kinds of polymorphism that you would often see in OO languages that would be more of a pain in some functional languages. And on top of that, it has a full-blown macro system, and it's still explicit though. So if you're using a certain macro, you can look at the top of a file and you'll see use in it or using, and you know that something is being done with a macro and you know where to find that macro. So it's really impressive across the board. And for my own use case, the fault tolerance was just kind of an unexpected benefit I wasn't even looking for. Although having found it, it's pretty neat. So needless to say, I got very interested in Elixir, and I've been working with it quite a bit for the past year and a half. And I want to share that with more people, and that's what this whole channel is about. So the site is called Alchemist.camp. I know that .camp is not the most common top-level domain, but you know it's 2018 and the .com was already taken. So it's Alchemist.camp, like a camp where alchemists make their elixirs or something like that. So the main goal here is learn through building. There are some other screencasts to learn Elixir from. Unlike those, my focus is not going to be highly polished short videos that teach you one language feature at a time. I'm not going to have a video that teaches you what a function is and says, here's how you declare a function. Here's another way to declare it. Here's how you can invoke it. Instead, I'm going to focus on actually building things through projects. Really simple projects at the beginning, but over time, more and more complex projects. And I'm actually going to pull in a lot of inspiration from stuff that I'm working on. And if I implement something for Alchemist.camp, you will probably be able to see how I did it in a screencast. I'm aiming it at learners who have some programming experience. Elixir is a fantastic language, but if you're totally new to programming, I don't recommend it as a first language. You should probably learn something like Python or JavaScript or Ruby, where lots of people can help you and there are lots of resources and you don't have to be quite as self-sufficient. Or better yet, learn whatever language your friend already knows and is willing to help you with. But once you do have some programming experience, you should be able to learn everything you need from Alchemist.camp, and I will do everything I can to make it friendly to people who don't know anything about Elixir or the tools or how to work with it. The site has a freemium model, so that means a lot of stuff is free. In fact, over half of the videos will be free. And I want to make sure that people who don't want to or can't pay anything can still learn Elixir. For those who want a bit more, I want to make sure that they know how I teach and what they'd be getting before they pay anything. And for those who don't like how I teach at all, they can go somewhere else, that's fine, or just take the free videos, that's fine as well. Obviously, if people want to sign up for the premium level, then I would be super happy, but really it's just based on whatever value I can provide to you. So that's the overall plan, and I hope that you're interested and you want to learn more about Elixir. If that's the case, come on down to alchemist.camp and sign up for a free account. It basically just organizes all the free videos and makes it easier for you to get around. And come code with me.